Hello everyone and welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us talking, as we often do, about anything and everything property. Today we had a brief chat about valuations, and I felt that was an interesting conversation to have because, well, I think it is because we get when we're talking about valuations here, we're talking about estate agent valuations first, because there are a number of other valuation types. And given one of your goals this year is to sell at least one property to fund further purchasing, you're looking to market a property.
Yep.
And you've had valuations, and I was literally dumbfounded by the range of valuations. So maybe you could just share with the audience about what we just talked about.
The valuations have, so we've only got two so far, but the valuations have £150,000 between them.
Amazing.
So there's a little bit of variety between those two agents that we've talked to. Now, one of the agents does know the property better than the other one. Unfortunately, that's the one coming in at the lower valuation. But
that makes sense. I'd be surprised if it was the higher.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were expecting a valuation, or hoping for a valuation about 50,000 or so more than the bottom one that came in. But obviously the one that's then a further 100,000 above that was it would be very nice if it happened, but I feel it may be a little optimistic.
But this is the perennial issue, isn't it? Because you don't want to bucket all estate agents together, and there are, I've worked with some very good ones recently, actually, but, to range a property at 150,000 greater than someone else might. Have you considered getting a third?
We may well do that. In the defence of the agents, you won't catch me doing this very often, but it is a very difficult property to value, I think, because it's a completely unique property on the street. There are no other properties like it. It's a detached house on a street of terrace houses. It's a significantly larger plot than anything else on the street. So that you're not going to walk down the road and find some comparables. So it is a difficult valuation task. But yeah, as you say, it's a big range, and the higher valuation may come down once they've had a better look at the property. That valuation was given before they'd actually seen inside the property. So that's obviously something we need to arrange. So it's difficult because there's tenants in there. But once they've done that, they may well bring down the valuation. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very much like a company. It sounds to me like a company that hasn't got much stock at the moment, and that's a big fishing exercise. So it's a difficult property to evaluate, but how have you done that?
Well, we sort of just picked a number out of the sky that felt nice.
Same as all of us, yeah. or the number we really wanted.
Yeah. Some years ago, we had somebody who was potentially interested in purchasing it from us. So our valuation is sort of connected to that.
Right.
But it was, even that discussion was only very early stage discussions, so we didn't get into real details, and of course that number could have varied once they really started talking to us about possibilities and things got serious. So it's always hard to tell in early stage discussions.
Yeah, and the reason it was an interesting subject to me is because I put a property on the market in October of last year, and the truth is, and estate agents, put your hands over your ears, I had kind of in my head already decided which estate agent I was going to use, but obviously wanted to get multiple views of what the property was worth. So, and I think most of us do, don't we? Whether we're selling our own home versus an investment property, we've all got an idea of what we think it's worth based on what we know, for better or for worse. And in my head, I had the valuation of this property down at around the I think 315 to 325. If I was being really honest with myself, I thought that's about the range.
That's pretty specific.
Well, it's because it's an HMO property, because you're working with generally multiples of the rental income. You can be a little bit more precise, I think, around the valuation. But it depends. Bricks and mortar can also come up similar. But so I had the estate agent come in that I was pretty sure I was going to pick. They said 325. Which was pretty much about bang on, because I thought, well, okay, you market it for 325. If you're lucky, you get 315, then that's about right.
Yeah.
And then the other one just came in at between 385 and 400, which, based on the current market as it was then, probably still now, I just knew just wasn't feasible. And that's why it's an interesting subject to me, because I think there's still, and I'm not suggesting they will do this, but I think there's probably an inherent thing in estate agency where they believe that most customers want the highest price for the property, because of course we do. But I know that people like you and I, we want our ego massaged, but we also, we want realistic. If the market's actually 15, 20% lower than what I think it's worth, then just tell me that. And I'd rather hear that than somebody say, so when they actually followed up with me, the second agent, and said, will you be marketing with us? I just again gave them the true feedback. I said, look, I just feel that your market valuation was way out. And they said, well, obviously we can correct that. And my view was obviously, well, that horse has bolted. Mm-hmm. Because it's happened so many times, and I'm sure for all of us, whether investors or not, where you've had a valuation at X price, and it happened to me, and then 2 weeks later they say, oh, we just need to revise the price down. And I said, but how has the market changed that much in 2 weeks? It hasn't. All that's changed is you've given a number which sounded really appealing, because I'd love to have that money in my bank, to 2 weeks later go, right, we just need to now down value it to something which is more reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic estate agent marketing, isn't it? Give you a nice shiny big number, to make you think that that they'll be the best person to sell it for you and achieve that big number.
Yeah.
But often the priority is not necessarily a biggest number; it's a fastest number, or
well, it's close to market, and we will then take our choice, won't we? So if someone said to me, well, the market's saying that your property, Stuart, is worth 315. I'd say, okay, if that's what you really think it is, I should want to market that at 325, because ultimately we are the arbiters of that price. It's what we want to sell it for. And then at least then the agent can turn around in 3-4 weeks' time and say, okay, Stuart, do you now want to try the right price, which is what I gave you at the start? And that's fine. And, I'm sure it's such a difficult thing dealing with customers. But my precursor to all of this with estate agents is usually, what do you think a realistic guide price is? And that's why I get frustrated, because I deliberately ask that question, because I like, and depending on our situations, if we want a quick sale versus if I'm happy to leave it on the market 6 months, which personally I never would be, but if I were, then okay, I'll put an extra 5% on what we think it's worth. But most of us want those properties gone fairly rapidly, knowing that the conveyancing process is going to last 3 to 4 months, plus the sales cycle. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, we put properties on the market to sell them, not to just have them sat there listed for months. Yeah. So I think it's important to choose a good starting price, because if you get that wrong, I think often you'll miss a lot of people who might consider it, because once they see it come on, it's too high, they dismiss it, and yes, they might see it again later when the price is being dropped, but that then conjures up other thoughts and sort of, well, why is the price being dropped? What's wrong with it? And might still put people off. So I think it is important to at least be within the bounds of realism from the start when listing property.
And that's the other point that I was thinking about, is that, so for me, I've taken mine off the market because we went on mid-ish.
What did you actually list it for?
What do you mean?
Well, you had different valuations. What level did you actually list it at?
Oh, I went at the reasonable valuation from the estate agent that I kind of knew was going to put it on. Mm-hmm. And just to caveat that, the estate agent I went with, they are more aligned to HMO properties, so I've seen them. So the funny thing is, and this may make you laugh, but I would never buy from this company. I would only sell from them, and that actually is a compliment to them, because they sell properties at what I believe is a good price for the vendor for HMO properties. Right. So as an investor, when I look at their property, as soon as I see it's this estate agent, I just scroll on because I know they're going to for the maximum amount that they probably can, which is obviously great from a selling perspective.
Exactly, yeah.
So I wouldn't ever buy from them, but they were the first company I called to sell from. And I then, to answer your question, marketed pretty much at what they suggested because I agreed with it. But I would take their market view. But similarly to you, I'm going into the market quite a lot just to see what's happening because that's where my portfolio is. But the point I was just going to say, what you talked about, is that I went on in October, which was actually a bad time, to be fair. But it was a punt.
In hindsight.
But it was a punt. I didn't need hindsight. I knew it was a bad time, but I thought, well, let's have a punt just in case there are any buyers in the market pre-Christmas. But it's a big property. It's a very big property. It's a significant investment for somebody. So I always knew I was going to kind of take it off pre-Christmas anyway. But the point you just made, which is absolutely another key factor in it, which is if it goes on at the right price, let's just say you get sucked in by the estate agent and they give you all of the information and the rationale as to why you should market at their price, which you may or may not know is an inflated one, and then that goes on the market for a month. Then you reset the price and it's on for another month. Then maybe you drop it again to get more viewings. By then you've been on the market for 3 months. Now people like you and I are asking the question, I wonder why that's been on so long. I wonder what's wrong with that.
Yep, exactly, yeah.
And the first point was, again, buyers in the market, if it's at the wrong price, are just going to scroll by for that first month. So you've missed your sales if you wanted a quick sale.
Yeah.
And that's why I think some of it can be so frustrating. And I'm sure it's as frustrating for estate agents as it is for us as investors and buyers and sellers.
So how did you come up with your valuation for that property?
So mine was a really simple one based on rental income and then using a multiplier on that rental income.
Did you look at other properties in the area at all to see whether it was reasonable against others, or was it
definitely.
Really just rental income multiplier?
No, it's a factor of all of those things. As you know, this particular property is as central as you're ever going to get, so it commands a bit more of a premium. It's got all of the things that. So this property would sell to an investor. It's not and not someone that's new to investing. So, it's got all of the planning permissions. It's got the HMO licensing. It's actually rented of the rooms that we've got available. 75% are already booked in from this September 2020. So, all of that factors in. It's very central. It's near where it needs to be. So I'll look at all of that. I mean, I was just thinking for your property, which is very difficult. So something I would do in my old sort of life when I'm perhaps doing data strategy or other analytics is finding another area very similar in terms of demographics. Have you thought about doing that perhaps?
No, basically. I think you could be right there. It could be an approach. I'm not sure what depth you'd go to for that though. So many factors go into making up sort of the price of an area. So how close it is to the centre of town, how close it is to public transport, how close it is to flood risk areas, and then of course the size of the property, the type of the property, the kind of maintenance you might expect, what the neighbours are like. I don't know. I think you'd be hard pressed to try to find another area to replicate.
Well, the truth is, the market will determine it. Without trying to sound overly simplistic, we could sit here and talk about valuations as we could with estate agents, and we could all agree. We could sit around this table, and we wouldn't. I mean, if there's 3 people in the room, we'd probably all have a different view. But if by miracle we all agreed and said, yeah, 675,000, that's the price, it doesn't matter, because ultimately the market will decide at whatever stage the market's in.
Of course, yeah. Assuming it does actually sell. If it doesn't sell, then the market is silent.
But that's the point, is that it will always sell at the right price. If it hasn't sold, it's not the right price.
Yep, indeed.
For the market at that time.
Yep.
Yeah. So even for me, I could have lopped 50,000 off my property in November, and I'm quite sure I would have had interest and I would have sold it.
Did you get viewings?
We had a handful. We had a handful of viewings.
Any offers?
Tire kickers. I had one offer which was so derisible. I didn't even give it a response. I just said to the estate agent, "Don't even talk to me about that offer." It was stupid. Mm-hmm. So it was someone that just thought they'd chance their arm in November, pre-Brexit, and as someone that's not what we would class a motivated seller, as in I wanted to sell it, but I'm not desperate. Then there was no way I was going to entertain. I mean, it was. I'm thinking, people, if you're listening, I'm just thinking.
It's okay, I'll cut this bit out, it's fine.
No, that's fine. It was 20% below the asking price. And
that's a big chunk, especially when you think you priced it realistically to start with.
That's exactly.
Big drop.
And if you're buying a property that's it's 100% occupied, we're talking about multi-let room, multi-let property, 100% occupied. It's already got bookings for the following year. It's in a great area. It's a huge property. It's 4 stories. It's got it's got a gym. It's got a room with a gym equipment in it. Mm-hmm. It's got another spare. So it's a big property. So then to come along and just say, "Yeah, we'll offer you 60 grand." I was like, "Yeah, thanks, but no thanks."
Great. Yeah, 60 grand less is a lot of a difference.
Yeah. I think. It just goes to show when we talk about evaluation, there's a lot there. And what we haven't talked about, which is something I've done previously as well, is get RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors valuations as well to support, refinancing actually from my point of view. But that's something else that could be done with any property if you really want it.
So I was going to say slightly more random-ish than or permanent. Mm-hmm. I was going to say, have you looked at the Zoopla valuations? I've seen a lot of people saying that they do use those at least as a guide, but also that they fluctuate a lot. Presumably, the sort of technology behind them is not as consistent as perhaps it could be.
Yeah, so I used those tools, and there's probably a good episode in there to talk about this. And obviously, Patma can support with this, Simon.
I am, as it would happen, working on elements of Patma that will provide valuations. Yeah, both for sale and for rent, but they're going to be some way off before they're released.
So for me, I think if you're when I'm refinancing, if I'm thinking about it, the comparables always come from properties sold. Mm-hmm. So no bank's going to lend you on what Zoopla says, what any other forecaster says.
You say that. Last time I remortgaged my own home, my property that I live in, that's exactly what they did. So it's mortgaged with the Halifax, and they said, what's the property worth? And I said, well, Zoopla says it's worth this. I said, okay. And because it's an interest-only mortgage, which you can't get these days, but for legacy reasons it is, they said, how are you going to repay this? So I said, well, I'm going to sell some of my own investment properties. And they said, how much are they worth? I said, well, Zoopla says they're worth this and this. I said, okay. Yeah. And they just accepted them. They didn't query them. They didn't. It passed through their underwriting checks and everything. No problem. So,
well, I think that's obviously we don't know, but I think that's probably less about the Zoopla valuation than it is about them just having a number. Clearly, they just needed numbers.
You could be right.
And they were happy with the number. I think if they were unhappy with the number, my experience, particularly with investment properties, specifically with investment properties, is they will always look for comparables, sold comparables, and whenever I've had to do my own background on this, and I've done it a couple of times, and of course, lender by lender will vary. So it could, Halifax, I know have been quite flexible in the past for me as well. But when it comes to, I use Kent Reliance, part of One Savings Bank. If there's no, I think it was 2 years so I found a comparable with 3 years, they just wouldn't accept it. And I've had downgrades on valuations. Even so, if a valuation is lower than I want, once I put a case together and put it back, the likelihood is 90% plus that you will fail. There is also opportunity where, again, you get specific valuation. So like I'll use a RIC surveyor, and that's worked in the past. But for the banks that I've used, they will only ever base it on sold. And that might just be HMO market. It could well be. And of course now, we go back to the stress testing and everything else. And on top of that, if you're buying rental properties. But just to answer the question, when I look, to be honest, I find Zoopla, the range too wide. So for me, it's not specific enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wouldn't use it for actually valuing something that I was thinking of buying.
I actually don't use it anymore, is the truth. To be honest, I use Rightmove now, which I never thought I would. I just look at, because again, it's just sold house prices.
Yep.
I do use Zoopla just to double check, because it's really, really weird. Sometimes a house sale will appear on Rightmove sold, but it won't be on Zoopla, or could be the other way around. So again, if you're looking at comparables, that's quite good just to double check both, because I don't know why. Maybe there's just a quicker data feed into one of to Rightmove for land registry. Anyway, I don't know. It's probably just one of those data latency things. But I've also don't use it that much anymore actually. But I used to use mouse price quite a lot.
Yep.
I don't know. It seemed very similar to, although their valuations were very different to Zoopla.
Oh, interesting.
There seemed to be more science behind it, whereas Zoopla, I don't know whether they just take the area, so say if you were using a RH1 and they'd say, well, in the last 5 years, property price has grown 7.5%, they then just apply that to their time and the sold price, if that makes sense.
Yeah, having done having spent some time looking into house prices and sort of how they split down by area. So, for example, trying to do that in RH1, because it's local, it's often my sort of test space. You look at the sold properties each month, and it might be 50 properties or something. But you take the average or even a median of that, and they fluctuate a lot every month. So, as in the swing from month to month might be 100,000.
Yeah.
And it's just because of the type of properties that happen to sell that month.
I was going to say.
It's really, really difficult to actually work out the trends between these, I think, especially on such small areas.
I think that's a really good tip, and I was thinking about that as you talked about it. So invariably now, if I'm looking at it, I will always filter by property type. So if I'm looking at whether that's on Rightmove sold prices or Zoopla sold prices, I will have a look at by detached or terrace, because what you've got to factor in is, your example of this area, well, I know, because, we both lived in similar areas, you might look at a growth of whatever percent, but there could be a block of flats in the same area as 4-bed houses, and that's going to just make a mockery of any sort of planning you do. So
yeah, quite. It does matter, and quite often looking at averages don't average out enough across these things. The
only time I use averages actually is if I'm doing some work with investors, and we've spilled into a number of subjects here, but is I'll look at average, as we often do. We'll look at average sold prices and then say, okay, well, if the average in this area it's increased by 10% in 5 years, then I'll just factor that into.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at an average across either a wide area or a wide amount of time, then I think you can get away with it.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But trying to sort of look at a single postcode or a single outcode,
postal sector,
outcode, whatever, the first 3 bits.
Postal sector.
Within months, then I think both those 2 dimensions are just too small to really get decent trends out of it.
Well, we've both got data backgrounds, and we know what happens when you're using a small data set. It's variable, and it can fluctuate wildly. That's why
ends up very misleading.
More data is better.
Yeah, definitely. We're nearly out of time, but I thought just before we finish up, you had a final element of test, I think, recently for your after-school footballing activities. How did that go? Did you win? Are you qualified?
Yeah. The FA tutor didn't turn up on the day.
Oh no!
It was a very bad weather day, and so we've rearranged. So a member of the Football Association will be back to see my training in a couple of weeks. But no, thanks for asking.
Oh no! Okay, how disappointing that we don't have a conclusion there to finish on. We'll have to save that one.
We just need some like EastEnder type drums for the next episode.
Yes, great.
Will he pass his FA level 2?
Well, on that note, you can find show notes at thebusinessofproperty.com.